The subway station was never really quiet, but this particular afternoon felt louder than usual. It was that time of day when everyone was rushing, heads down, feet moving fast on the dirty concrete floor. The air smelled like old pretzels, exhaust fumes, and a thick layer of dust that never seemed to go away, no matter how much the cleaners swept. People were tired. They were thinking about dinners they had to cook, bosses they had to please, or bills they had to pay. In a place like this, it was very easy to become invisible. If you stayed still long enough, the crowd would just flow around you like water around a stone. That was exactly what Leo did. He sat on a small, upturned plastic crate tucked away in a corner near the entrance to the tracks. He wasn't begging for money, at least not in the way people usually did. He didn't have a sign with a sad story written on it, and he wasn't holding out a paper cup. Leo was just 10 years old, small for his age, with bony knees that stuck out through the holes in his faded jeans. His shoes were starting to fall apart, the rubber soles peeling away from the canvas like old bark. On the ground in front of him, resting on a piece of flattened cardboard box, was a drawing. It wasn't a very good drawing. It was done with a thick black marker, the kind that smells strong and chemical. Someone had drawn a set of piano keys rectangles of black and white that wobbled a bit where the marker slipped. It looked like a child's art project, something that should be stuck on a refrigerator door with a magnet, not lying on the cold floor of a subway station. But Leo didn't care what it looked like. To him, it wasn't just ink and cardboard. It was an instrument. He sat hunched over, his back curved to protect himself from the constant draft of wind that blew up the stairs whenever a train arrived underground. His eyes were squeezed shut tight. If you looked at him quickly, you might think he was in pain or maybe just praying. But if you stopped and watched for a moment, you would see his hands. They were hovering just an inch above the dirty cardboard. Dancing in the air, Leo was playing a song that only he could hear in his head. The noise of the station, the screeching metal of the trains, the heavy thud of boots, the distant announcements on the PA system, all of it faded away. It was replaced by a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through his bones. He imagined a grand piano, big and black and shiny, the kind he had seen once in a movie the shelter had put on for the kids. He imagined the weight of the keys, the way they would push back against his fingertips. His right hand moved first, his fingers pressing down on the imaginary white keys. Plink, plunk, plunk. He didn't make a sound, but his brain filled in the music. It was a melody he had been working on for weeks. It started slow, sad and heavy, mimicking the feeling of being hungry and cold. Then his left hand joined in, adding a rhythm. A heartbeat to the song. A businessman in a gray coat hurried past, glancing down at his phone. He accidentally kicked Leo's cardboard, sliding it a few inches to the right. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't open his eyes. He simply adjusted his hands, keeping the rhythm going in his mind, sliding his imaginary dance along with the cardboard. The businessman didn't even apologize. He just kept walking, lost in his own world. Leo didn't mind the rudeness. He was used to it. Being invisible was safer sometimes. When people saw you, they usually wanted something from you, or they wanted you to go away. Here in his corner, with his eyes closed, he was free. He thought about his mother whenever he played. She used to hum to him when he was little, before she got too sick to work, before the apartment was taken away. He tried to remember the songs she hummed. They weren't famous songs. They were just noises she made, soft and comforting, to rock him to sleep when the neighbors were fighting next door. He tried to copy those sounds with his hands now. He imagined the low notes were her voice, deep and steady, telling him that everything would be okay. The tempo in his head picked up. A train was approaching, the rumble growing louder beneath the floor. Leo matched his speed to the rumble. His fingers flew across the cardboard, tapping the air so fast that his wrists started to ache. It was a storm now. The music in his head was loud and chaotic, crashing like waves against a cliff. It felt good to let it out. It felt like screaming without making a noise. He swayed back and forth, his dirty hoodie rubbing against the rough wall behind him. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing and shouting. One of them pointed at Leo. "Look at that kid," the boy said, loud enough for Leo to hear. He's playing air piano." "What a freak," the others laughed. It was a mean sound, sharp and jagged. Usually words like that would make Leo shrink. They would make him want to curl up into a ball and disappear until the station was empty. But today, the music was too strong. He was in the middle of a crescendo. The most beautiful part of the song was building up inside him, swelling like a balloon about to burst. He didn't stop. He didn't open his eyes to glare at them. He just played louder in his mind, letting the imaginary notes drown out their laughter. They didn't understand. They couldn't hear what he heard. They couldn't see the golden hall he was imagining, or the thousands of people clapping for him. He wasn't a freak on a crate. He was a maestro on a stage. The train roared into the station above them, the sound deafening in the concrete tunnel. The rush of air from the passing train blew hair into Leo's face, but he didn't brush it away. He was hitting the high notes now, the sounds that felt like glass shattering, like birds taking flight. Slowly, the noise of the train faded as it pulled away. The station settled back into its constant hum. Leo brought his hands down gently. He played the final chord in his head, a soft, lingering sound that hung in the air like fog. He held his pose for a long moment, fingers hovering over the black ink rectangles, chest heaving slightly from the effort. Then he opened his eyes. The world came rushing back. The gray walls, the flickering fluorescent lights, the discarded soda cans on the ground. The magic faded, leaving him feeling cold and empty again. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking a little bit. He rubbed them on his pants, trying to get warm. He looked around to see if anyone had stopped. Maybe, just maybe, someone had seen him and understood. But the station was already refilling with a new wave of passengers coming down the escalator. Nobody was looking at him. The teenagers were gone. The businessman was gone. Leo sighed, a small, tired sound that barely left his lips. He reached out and smoothed the crease in the cardboard where the man had kicked it. He adjusted the crate so he could sit up a little straighter. He was hungry. His stomach gave a loud, embarrassing growl. But there was no one close enough to hear it. He closed his eyes again, shutting out the disappointment. He didn't have a real piano. He didn't have a home. He didn't even have a coat that was thick enough for winter. But he had this. He had the music in his head. It was the one thing nobody could take away from him. He lifted his hands. Ready to start the next song? Ready to go back to the place where he was somebody important? But just as his fingers were about to touch the air again, a shadow fell across his cardboard. Leo froze. He kept his eyes closed for a second longer, hoping it was just someone waiting for a friend who would walk away in a moment. But the shadow didn't move. He could feel the presence of someone standing right in front of him. It's blocking the flow of the foot traffic slowly, nervously. Leo opened his eyes. Standing there was a man. He didn't look like the commuters. He wasn't rushing. He was standing perfectly still, dressed in a suit that looked too clean for the dusty subway station. His shoes were polished to a shine that reflected the harsh overhead lights. He was older, with lines cut deep into his face, and he was staring down at Leo not with pity, and not with disgust, but with a look of intense curiosity. He held a leather briefcase in one hand, and with the other. He was adjusting the cuff of his shirt. Leo felt his face get hot. He quickly pulled his hands back against his chest, hiding them under the sleeves of his hoodie. He waited for the man to say something mean. He waited for the laugh. But the man didn't laugh. He just looked from the boy's dirty face down to the wobbly drawn piano keys on the floor, and then back up to the boy's eyes. A small, strange smile tugged at the corner of the man's mouth. It wasn't a mean smile. It looked like he had just figured out a secret that no one else knew. "You're very good," the man said. His voice was deep, but not loud. It cut through the noise of the station like a bell. Leo blinked, confused. He didn't know what to say. He just stared. The man leaned in a little closer. The smell of expensive cologne replacing the smell of pretzels and dirt for a moment. "I've been watching you," the man said, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like a challenge. "And I have a proposal for you." Leo stayed perfectly still on his crate. He didn't know who this man was, but for the first time all day, he felt like he was actually being seen. The air in the station seemed to get a little thinner, or maybe Leo just forgot how to breathe properly. He pulled his sleeves down over his knuckles, trying to hide his trembling hands. He looked up at the stranger, blinking rapidly. People didn't usually stop to talk to him unless they were yelling at him to move or telling him to go to a shelter. This was different. The man wasn't looking through him. He was looking right at him with eyes that were sharp and clear, missing nothing. "A proposal?" Leo squeaked. His voice was raspy from disuse. It sounded small against the echo of a distant train. The man in the suit nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, and for a second, Leo flinched, afraid of what might come out. But the man only pulled out a silver money clip. He peeled off a crisp bill $100. More money than Leo had seen in a year, and held it out. "You play music with your hands," the man said, pointing at the empty air where Leo's fingers had been dancing. "I saw you. I know what you were hearing in your head." The timing was perfect. The emotion was surprisingly mature for a boy your age. Leo stared at the money, then up at the man. He didn't reach for it. "It was just pretend. I don't have a real piano." "I know," the man said. He waved the bill slightly, a tempting gesture. "Take this. It's yours just for answering me. But I want to offer you a chance to earn much more." The boy hesitated. His stomach was growling, and the thought of a hot meal made his head spin. He slowly reached out and took the bill. It felt crisp and smooth, nothing like the crumpled ones people usually dropped into the gutter. He shoved it deep into his pocket, clutching it tight. "What do you want?" Leo asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. He had learned early on that adults rarely gave something for nothing. The man pointed a gloved finger toward the center of the station hall. "You see that?" Leo turned his head. Over by the main entrance to the shopping mall connected to the subway, a crowd was gathering. There were velvet ropes set up, and security guards standing with their arms crossed. In the middle of the circle, standing alone and majestic under the bright lights, was a grand piano. It was black and glossy, reflecting the world around it like a mirror. It looked like a spaceship had landed in the dirty station. "There is a charity gala tonight," the man explained. "They are showing off that piano before they auction it off. It is worth more than this entire station makes in a year." Leo looked at the piano, then back at his dirty sneakers. "So," the man chuckled. It was a dry sound, like leaves skittering on pavement. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Leo could hear him over the rushing commuters. "I used to play. I know the difference between a child banging on keys and someone who actually feels the music. I saw you. You have the fire." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then he leaned in, his expression turning serious, almost mocking in its intensity. "I'll give you $1 million if you play that piano," the man teased. Leo's mouth fell open. He stared at the man, waiting for the punchline. $1 million? $1 million, the man repeated calmly. He checked his watch, a heavy gold thing that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. "Cash. In a trust fund, so you don't spend it all on candy. But you have to play. Right now. In front of all those people." Leo felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. Or maybe the man was crazy. "I can't," Leo whispered, panic rising in his chest. "Look at me. I'm dirty. I don't know how to play a real piano. I only know how it sounds in my head." "That is exactly why you must do it," the man said. His eyes weren't laughing anymore. They were intense, boring into Leo. "Most people play notes. They read paper and push buttons. You play from here?" He tapped his own chest. "I want to see if the real thing sounds as good as the air piano." "Can't," Leo said again, shaking his head. He started to back away, clutching his $100 bill. He just wanted to go back to his corner, close his eyes, and be safe. The piano was too big. The crowd was too big. The risk was too high. The man let him take a few steps back. He didn't chase him. He just stood there, looking composed and untouchable in his expensive suit. "Think about it, Leo," the man said. Leo froze. How did he know his name? The man pointed at the tattered backpack lying next to the crate. Leo's school ID was hanging out of the side pocket. "One song," the man continued, his voice cutting through the noise of the station. "If you play, and you are terrible, I will give you $10,000 just for the effort. If you play, and you are good, well, $1 million changes a lot of things. No more foster homes. No more cold nights. No more drawing keys on cardboard." The words hit Leo harder than any physical blow. No more cold nights. He looked at the grand piano again. It seemed to glow in the distance. It was terrifying. It was a monster waiting to eat him alive. If he touched it and nothing came out, or if he made a terrible noise, everyone would laugh. They would point. He would be a fool. But if he didn't try, he would stay here. He would be invisible forever. Around them, the station continued its chaotic rhythm. A busker on the other platform was playing a screeching violin. A baby was crying. The announcer droned on about delays. Nobody cared about the dirty boy and the rich man. The man sighed, checking his watch again. "I have a car waiting. I cannot stay all day." "This is a one-time offer, Leo. Walk away and you go back to your cardboard. Walk over there and you might just change your life." Leo looked down at his hands. They were still trembling. He remembered the song he had been playing just moments ago. The song about his mother. The song that made him feel like he was flying. It felt so real in his head. What if it could be real in the world, too? He had imagined the keys 1,000,000 times. He knew exactly how much pressure it took to press a C, how a slide of the thumb could smooth a transition. He had practiced on tables, on window ledges, on his own thighs. He looked at the man. The man's face was impossible to read. He looked like a statue, rich and bored. Or maybe he was just very good at hiding his nerves. "You promise?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I never joke about money," the man replied. Though there was a flicker of something deep in his eyes, something like hope. Leo took a deep breath. The air smelled of dust and pretzels, but for a second, he imagined he smelled the scent of polished wood in old concert halls. He felt the $100 bill in his pocket, heavy and promising. He didn't say yes. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, Leo turned around. He didn't go back to his crate. He didn't run for the exit. He took a step toward the grand piano. His legs felt heavy, like lead weights. His shoes squeaked on the floor. The distance between his corner and the center of the hall felt like a mile. As he walked, people glanced at him. They saw a dirty kid in a hoodie walking with a strange purpose. A few moved out of his way, wrinkling their noses at the smell of unwashed clothes. The man in the suit followed him, walking a few steps behind. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer comfort. He just walked, watching Leo like a hawk watches its prey. As they got closer to the ropes, the security guards looked up. They frowned, stepping forward to intercept the boy. They reached out to grab his arm, to tell him to scram. But the man in the suit held up a hand. He flashed a badge, or maybe just said a quiet word. The guards froze. They looked at the rich man, then at the dirty boy, and confused, they stepped back. Leo reached the velvet rope. He unhooked it, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped the velvet loop. He stepped inside the circle. The noise of the station seemed to change here. It was muffled, as if the piano was creating a bubble around itself. Up close, the piano was enormous. It loomed over him, a shiny black beast with white teeth. The lid was propped open, reflecting the lights above. It looked pristine, perfect, and completely alien. Leo felt tiny. He felt like an ant crawling onto the altar of a god. He looked at the keys. They were white, made of real ivory, smooth and inviting. The black keys were raised just enough, waiting. He sat down on the bench. It was firm, upholstered in soft red velvet that felt like a cloud compared to his wooden crate. His feet dangled for a moment before he found the gold petals on the floor. The crowd around the ropes had grown. People were stopping to watch. What was this street kid doing at the expensive instrument? Was this part of the show? A few pulled out their phones to record. They were waiting for a joke, for him to bang on the keys and run away. Leo could feel their eyes on his back. Dozens of spotlights, all burning him. He swallowed hard. His throat was dry. He wanted to run. He wanted to go back to his safe corner where no one could see him fail. Then he felt a presence beside him. The man in the suit had stepped up to the piano, leaning against the curved side. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at Leo. "No one is watching," the man lied softly. "It's just you and the music." $1 million, Leo. Show me what you've got." Leo closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of the station. He blocked out the phones, the guards, the suit. He reached out with his right hand. His fingers hovered over the keys, just inches away. For a moment, time stood still. He was back on his crate. He was playing the air. He was safe. Then he lowered his fingers. The first contact was electric. The key pushed down easily, a weighted resistance that felt perfectly natural. A sound exploded from the piano, not a screech, but a clear, deep, resonant note that rang out through the station like a bell in a valley. It was louder than anything Leo had ever made. It was real. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. His left hand found the bass notes deep and growling, and then he began to play. The melody that had been trapped inside his head for years finally had a voice. Asterisk. The first note was like a crack of thunder in a small room. It didn't just make a sound. It seemed to shake the dust from the ceiling tiles. For a split second, the constant noise of the subway station, the screeching wheels, the announcements, the thousands of footsteps seemed to vanish. People walking past froze in their tracks. A woman dropping a token into the turnstile missed the slot. Even the security guards, who had been ready to grab the boy and drag him away, stopped with their hands halfway to their belts. Leo didn't notice any of this. His eyes were squeezed shut, his head tilted slightly to the side as if he was listening to a voice only he could hear. His fingers, usually stained with the grime of the city, were now flying across the ivory keys. They moved with a speed and precision that didn't seem possible for a kid who had never taken a lesson in his life. He started with a low, rumbling rhythm in his left hand. It was the sound of the earth moving, of trains grinding along tracks deep underground. It was a heavy, sad sound. Then his right hand joined in. The melody wasn't gentle. It was sharp and jagged, like glass breaking on the pavement. It mimicked the chaos of the rush hour, the rush of people pushing and shoving, the feeling of being small and trampled. The wealthy man stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the side of the piano. He watched the boy's hands closely. He had seen many pianists in his life, people who had practiced for 8 hours a day in fancy conservatories, people who knew every theory and rule. But watching Leo was different. This boy wasn't following rules. He was breaking them, yet the music made perfect sense. The boy played with a kind of desperate hunger, hitting the keys hard enough to make the piano shudder, and then instantly softening his touch to coax out a whisper of a note. A crowd began to form. At first, it was just a few curious commuters wondering why a dirty kid was sitting at an expensive instrument. But as the music grew louder, more people stopped. The circle around the piano widened. Phones were raised, cameras flashing, recording the scene. Usually, street performers were ignored in the subway. People were too busy, too tired to care about a guy with a guitar or a bucket drummer. But this was different. The sound coming from the grand piano was too powerful to ignore. It grabbed them by the collar and forced them to listen. Leo's mind was a hurricane of images. He wasn't thinking about the $1 million. He wasn't thinking about the man in the suit or the people watching. He was thinking about the long, cold nights in the group home. He was thinking about the bullying, the hunger, the feeling of being invisible. He poured all of that anger into the song. The tempo increased. His fingers became a blur, dancing up and down the scales, playing notes that shouldn't fit together, but somehow sounded beautiful. The song changed. The jagged, angry rhythm began to smooth out. The heavy bass notes softened. The melody shifted from a chaotic scream to a haunting cry. It was the sound of missing someone. It was the sound of remembering a mother's voice that was slowly fading from memory. Leo's lip began to quiver. Tears leaked out from under his closed eyelids, running down his dirty cheeks and dripping onto the piano keys. The crowd was dead silent now. No one checked their watches. No one complained about being late. It was one of those rare moments in a big city where 100 strangers all felt the same thing at the same time. The music was speaking to them. It reminded the tired businessman of his childhood home. It reminded the nurse on her way to a double shift of the loneliness she felt after her divorce. It was raw. It was real. The wealthy man felt a lump form in his throat. He watched as the boy poured his soul into the instrument. He saw the way the boy's shoulders hunched forward, protecting himself from the world even as he exposed his deepest feelings to it. The man realized then that he hadn't just found a talented kid. He had found a rare, uncut diamond. The boy had no technique, no polish, but he had something that couldn't be taught. He had a story to tell, and he was telling it with every fiber of his being. The music began to climb. The notes got higher, lighter, like birds taking flight. Leo's body swayed back and forth. He was no longer sitting on a hard bench in a subway station. He was flying. He was free. The joy of the music swelled inside him, pushing out the fear and the cold. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. He felt huge. He felt like he could touch the ceiling. He hit a series of high chords, ringing out like bells. The sound filled the vast cavern of the station, bouncing off the tiled walls and the metal escalators. It was a triumphant sound, a sound of survival. Then, slowly, he brought it back down. The right hand slowed, the melody becoming simpler, sweeter. The left hand returned to the deep, rumbling rhythm from the beginning, but now it was softer, like a lullaby. Leo played the final chord. It wasn't just one note. It was a handful of keys pressed together, creating a rich, complex harmony that hung in the air. He held his hands on the keys, letting the sound vibrate through his arms, his chest, his heart. He pressed the sustain pedal with his foot, keeping the note alive as long as possible. And then, silence. The natural hum of the station tried to creep back in, but it felt wrong now. The air was heavy, charged with the energy of the performance. For a long 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody clapped. It felt like clapping would break the spell, like the music was still floating in the air around them and they didn't want to scare it away. Leo slowly opened his eyes. The station looked brighter than before. He looked down at his hands, resting on the white keys. They were trembling violently now, the adrenaline crashing through his body. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Suddenly, the spell broke. A woman near the front let out a sob. Then, a man in a trench coat started clapping. It was slow at first, hesitant. Then another person joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite golf clap you hear at a fancy concert. It was loud, raucous, cheering. People were whistling, stomping their feet, shouting "Bravo!" A few bills were tossed onto the stage, landing near Leo's feet. Leo looked up, shocked. He saw the faces of the crowd, but they didn't look angry or annoyed anymore. They were smiling. Some were crying. They were looking at him with awe. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. He was seen. He looked to his side, where the wealthy man had been standing. The man was still there, clapping slowly, a strange look on his face. It wasn't a smirk anymore. It was a look of deep respect, perhaps even a little humility. The man stopped clapping and stepped closer to the bench. He didn't look at the crowd. He only looked at Leo. The applause started to die down as people sensed the interaction between the boy and the stranger. The station grew quiet again, waiting for what would happen next. Leo felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He had done it. He had played the piano. But now came the scary part. The boy slid his hands off the keys and pulled them into his lap, wiping his sweaty palms on his hoodie. He looked up at the man, fear and hope mixing in his eyes. Was it enough? Did he win? Or was he just a dirty kid who made a lot of noise? The man stared down at him, his expression unreadable. Then he slowly reached into his pocket. The crowd leaned in, watching the man's hand. Leo held his breath. He thought about the $1 million. He thought about a warm bed, a full fridge, and maybe, just maybe, life where he didn't have to be afraid anymore. The man pulled his hand out of his pocket. But it wasn't a check. It was a handkerchief. He leaned forward and gently wiped a tear track from Leo's cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that it made Leo flinch slightly. "You have a gift," the man said softly, his voice carrying in the quiet station. "A gift that money can't buy." Leo waited. "And the $1 million?" The man let out a short laugh, but it was kind. "Don't worry. A deal is a deal. But you don't understand yet. That money isn't the prize." The man straightened up and looked out at the hundreds of people still watching. He raised a hand to silence the murmurs. Then he looked back down at the boy, his eyes serious. "I didn't need to hear you play to know you were good," the man said. "I saw you playing on that piece of cardboard in the corner. I saw you making something out of nothing. That's why I made the offer. I wanted to see if you had the courage to sit on this bench when the stakes were real." Leo just stared at him, confused. "I was scared," he whispered. "Good," the man said. "Fear is just your body telling you that what you're doing matters." The man reached out again, but this time he offered his hand. It wasn't to give something to the boy. It was to help him stand up. "Come with me," the man said. "We have a lot to talk about. And no, you're not going back to the corner. You're never going back to that cardboard again." Leo looked at the man's hand. It was big and clean, with a gold ring on the finger. Then he looked back at the piano. It was silent now, just a beautiful object again. But he could still feel the vibration of the music in his fingertips. He took a deep breath, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and reached out. He took the man's hand. As he stood up, the crowd erupted again. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just for the music. It was for the boy. Leo let the man lead him away from the piano, away from the spotlight, and toward the exit. He didn't look back at his crate in the corner. He didn't look back at the cardboard drawing. He was walking toward something new. He didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time, he wasn't walking alone. Leaving the subway station. It felt like walking out of a deep underwater cave and suddenly breaking the surface into the bright, blinding sun. The air outside was crisp and cool, a sharp contrast to the stale, recycled warmth of the underground. Cars zoomed by on the busy street, their tires humming against the asphalt. And the city noises were different, here sharper, clearer, but somehow less overwhelming than the chaos Leo had just left behind. He was still in a bit of a daze. His fingers were tingling, vibrating with the ghostly memory of the keys he had just played. It didn't feel real. 10 minutes ago, his biggest worry was whether he would find a dry enough spot to sleep tonight. Now he was walking down the sidewalk next to a man who owned a suit that probably cost more than Leo's old foster parents. It's made in a year. The man didn't say much as they walked. He moved with a purpose, his long strides forcing Leo to trot slightly to keep up. People on the street stared. They saw the stark contrast between the two of them, the powerful, well-groomed figure, and the small boy in the dirty hoodie. Usually being stared at made Leo want to vanish. He would hunch his shoulders and stare at the cracks in the sidewalk. But today, he kept his head up. He had just played music that made people stop and listen. He had just done something incredible. For the first time, he felt like maybe he deserved to take up space on the sidewalk. They arrived at a large black car that was waiting at the curb. A driver in a uniform jumped out immediately and opened the rear door. The man gestured for Leo to get in. Leo hesitated. He looked at the pristine leather seats and the clean floor mats. He looked down at his own shoes, which were caked with subway grime and street dust. "It's okay," the man said, noticing the boy's hesitation. "Cars are meant to be driven, not worshipped. Get in." Leo took a breath and climbed in. The seats were soft, hugging him like a giant hand. It smelled like new leather and expensive air freshener. The man slid in beside him, and the door clicked shut with a heavy, solid thud. Instantly cutting off the noise of the street, the car pulled away smoothly. Leo pressed his face against the tinted window, watching the city slide by. He saw the familiar bodegas, the laundromats, and the people waiting for buses. It was his world, but he was viewing it through a filter now. He felt like he was watching a movie about his own life. "You played an improvisation," the man said suddenly. He wasn't looking at Leo. He was looking out his own window, watching the traffic. Leo turned away from the glass. Is that what it's called? Yes. You didn't play a song written by Mozart or Beethoven. You played what was in your heart? That is the hardest thing to do, the man said. He turned to look at Leo. I told you I used to play. I spent 30 years of my life trying to play what was on the page perfectly. I hit every note at the right time, with the right volume. I was technically perfect. But I was bored, and so was everyone who listened to me. Leo shifted in his seat. You sounded like you knew what you were talking about back there. You know about music? I know about the mechanics of music, the man corrected. I know the math of it. But today, sitting next to you, I felt something I haven't felt in decades. I felt jealous. Leo's eyes went wide. Jealous of me? I'm a nobody. I live in a group home. You are a nobody with more soul in your pinky finger than most concert pianists have in their entire bodies. Itty, the man said firmly. That is why we are going where we are going. Where are we going? Leo asked. The man smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. To my home. And before you ask, no, it is not to clean the floors. It is because a deal is a deal. I promised you a future, and we are going to start figuring out what that looks like. They drove for a long time, leaving the busy part of the city behind. The buildings got shorter, and the trees got bigger. They pulled up to a gate made of iron that slid open automatically. The car wound up a long driveway, lined with trees that were just starting to lose their leaves for winter. Finally, the house came into view. It wasn't just a house. It was a mansion. It was made of stone and glass, looking like something out of a fairy tale. There were windows everywhere, and lights were already turning on inside as the sun began to set. The car stopped, and the driver opened the door. Leo stepped out, his mouth slightly open. He had seen places like this on TV, but he never really believed people actually lived in them. It was quiet here. The only sound was the wind rustling the dry leaves. Come, the man said, walking toward the huge front door. They went inside. The entrance hall was bigger than Leo's entire group home. There was a chandelier hanging from the ceiling that sparkled like diamonds. The floor was made of marble, and Leo's shoes squeaked as he walked on it. He felt incredibly small and out of place. He clutched the straps of his backpack, the only possession he really cared about. A woman appeared from a side room. She looked kind, wearing a simple dress, and her face softened when she saw Leo. You must be the young musician, she said. I heard there was quite a spectacle at the station. This is him, the man said, taking off his coat. He is hungry. Please, bring us some food in the music room. Of course, she said, disappearing into the kitchen. The man led Leo down a hallway. They passed room after room, a library with floor-to-ceiling books. A living room with a fireplace that was crackling with a real fire. But at the end of the hall, there was a set of double doors. The man pushed them open. Leo stopped in his tracks. The room was large, the windows that looked out over the city lights twinkling in the distance. But in the center of the room, bathed in the soft light of a crystal lamp, sat a piano. It was another grand piano, black and shiny. But it looked even more majestic than the one in the station. The man walked over to a chair in the corner and sat down. Go ahead. Leo walked slowly toward the instrument. He felt a lump form in his throat. This room was so peaceful, so safe. It was the complete opposite of the subway. He reached out and touched the wood of the piano. It was smooth and warm. I don't understand, Leo said, turning to face the man. You said you'd give me $1 million? I played Do I Get the Money. The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Leo, listen to me. I have a lot of money. I have more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. Money is easy to come by when you know how to make it. But finding someone who can make a piano weep, that is rare. That is priceless. He stood up and walked over to a desk on the side of the room. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to Leo. This is a bank card, the man explained. It is linked to a trust account. It is not quite $1 million yet. You cannot access the full amount until you are older. but right now there is enough in there to take care of you for a long time. It will buy you clothes, food, and a place to live. But more importantly, it buys you time. Leo held the envelope. It was heavy time. Time to practice. Time to learn, the man said. I am going to find you the best teachers in the world. You are going to learn to read music. You are going to learn the history of the piano. And in exchange, you are going to play for me. Not for money, but because music needs to be shared. Just then, the woman from earlier came in with a tray. She had sandwiches, fruit, and a large glass of milk. She set it down on a small table near the piano. Leo realized suddenly how ravenous he was. His stomach gave a loud growl that echoed in the quiet room. Eat, the man said gently. You have had a long day. Leo sat down on the bench and took a sandwich. It had turkey and cheese on fresh bread, the kind he usually only stared at through the glass of deli counters. He took a huge bite. It tasted like heaven. He ate quickly, not caring about manners, just fueling his body. While he ate, he looked at the keys. He wanted to touch them again, but he was full now, and the tiredness from the day was crashing down on him all at once. His eyelids felt heavy. You can stay here tonight, the man said, as if reading his mind. There is a room ready for you. It has a bed, a real bed, with clean sheets. Leo swallowed a bite of sandwich. What about the $1 million? You have the card, the man said. It is real. You can check it yourself if you want. But Leo, I want you to understand something. The man walked over and stood next to the piano, looking at the city view. When I was your age, I loved music. But I loved security more. I chose the safe path. I made money, but I lost the music. Meeting you today, it reminded me of what I gave up. By helping you, maybe I get a little bit of that back. Leo looked at the man's profile. He looked like a statue, strong and unbreakable, but there was a sadness in his voice that Leo recognized. It was the same sadness Leo felt when he played his lonely songs. I want to play, Leo said suddenly. One more time? Before I sleep. The man turned and smiled. Be my guest. Leo wiped his hands on a napkin, trying to get the crumbs off. He turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. The room was so quiet that he could hear the clock ticking on the wall. He didn't play the loud, angry song from the subway. He didn't play the sad song about his mother. He played something new. It was soft and gentle. It was a song about a warm room, a full stomach, and a strange man who gave him a second chance. The notes floated through the air, mixing with the smell of old wood and the crackling fire from the other room. It was a sound of hope. The man closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in years, he didn't think about his empire or his stocks. He just listened. And it was enough. Asterisk, the morning sun didn't wake Leo up through a dirty, barred basement window like it usually did. Instead, it poured in through a pair of sheer white curtains, filling the room with a soft golden glow. For a few seconds, Leo lay perfectly still, staring at the white ceiling. He felt the softness of the mattress beneath him, the heavy weight of a thick duvet, and the silence. It was so quiet. No sirens, no shouting, no trains screeching on metal tracks. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. On the nightstand next to him sat a glass of water and a plate with a wrapped cookie. He remembered the piano. He remembered the man in the suit. He remembered the bank card in his pocket. For a second he thought it might have been an incredibly vivid dream, a trick of his tired mind. But then he looked down at his clothes. He was wearing a clean set of pajamas that smelled like fresh laundry, not like the street. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Below him, the grass was covered in frost, but the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. He was high above the city. He took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the house fill his lungs. He wasn't invisible anymore, after getting dressed in clothes that had been laid out for him. Jeans that actually fit and a warm sweater, he made his way downstairs. The house was huge, but it didn't feel scary in the daylight. It felt warm. He found his way to the kitchen, where the woman from the night before was arranging fruit on a platter. "Good morning," she said with a bright smile. "Sleep well." Leo nodded, still a little shy. "Yeah, I didn't wake up once. She gestured to the table. There was cereal, toast, eggs, and juice. It was enough food to feed a family, let alone one boy. Eat up. He is waiting for you in the music room. Leo ate quickly, the food tasting better than anything he had ever tasted. When he was finished, he walked down the long hallway to the double doors. He hesitated for just a second before pushing them open. The man was there, standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when Leo entered. Today, he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a simple sweater and slacks. He looked older, softer somehow, without the sharp armor of his business clothes. "Good morning, maestro," the man said. Leo felt his face get hot. "I'm not a maestro. I'm just Leo." The man smiled and walked over to a desk. He picked up a piece of paper. "I have the documents here. The trust fund is set up. You have access to it for necessities, and the full amount will be yours when you are 21. But that is the boring part." He put the paper down and looked at Leo seriously. "I also made some calls this morning. I have a friend coming over this afternoon. She is a teacher, a very strict one. She taught at the best music school in the country." Leo's eyes widened. "You want me to go to school?" "I want you to learn," the man corrected. "You have a rare gift, Leo, but right now it is like a rough diamond. It has potential, but it needs to be cut and polished to really shine. You taught yourself to play on a cardboard box, which is a miracle. But imagine what you can do if you learn the rules. Imagine what you can do if you learn to read the music other people wrote, so you can understand it better." Leo looked over at the grand piano sitting in the corner of the room. Yesterday, it had looked like a monster. Today it looked like a friend. He walked over to it and ran his hand along the smooth wood. "I'm scared," Leo admitted softly. "What if I'm not good enough? What if yesterday was a fluke?" The man walked over and put a hand on Leo's shoulder. His grip was firm but gentle. "Yesterday wasn't a fluke. Yesterday was a spark. My job and the teacher's job is to turn that spark into a fire. And as for not being good enough, you sat in a subway station and made 1,000 busy people stop and listen. You made me feel something I haven't felt in 30 years. You are good enough, Leo, but you can be better." Leo looked up at him. "Why are you doing this? I mean, I know you said you used to play, but why me? There are probably lots of kids who can play." The man sighed and looked out the window again. "Because you have nothing to lose. When I played, I was always worried about what people thought. I was worried about making a mistake. You just played. You poured your pain and your hope into the keys. You played like your life depended on it, because for you, maybe it did. That kind of honesty is rare. I want to protect that. I want to give you the chances I was too afraid to take." He squeezed Leo's shoulder and then let go. "So, what do you say? Are you ready to work?" Leo looked at the keys. He thought about the cold subway station. He thought about his drawing on the cardboard. He thought about the feeling of the music vibrating through his body. He didn't have to play on the floor anymore. He didn't have to pretend. He sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt right. He took a deep breath and played a simple scale. Do dash, re dash, mi dash, fa dash, so dash, la dash, ti dash, do. The notes rang out clear and perfect. "I'm ready," Leo said. The years that followed were a whirlwind of hard work. The teacher was indeed strict. She made him practice scales for hours until his fingers felt like they were going to fall off. She made him learn theory, reading little black dots on a page that turned into complicated rhythms. There were days when Leo hated it. There were days when he wanted to go back to the simple freedom of his cardboard keyboard, where he could just make up whatever he wanted without being corrected. But he never quit. And every time he felt like giving up, he would remember the man in the suit, the man who became his guardian, his mentor, and eventually something like a father. The man would sit in the room and listen to him practice, offering quiet encouragement or a stern word when Leo got lazy. Slowly, the rough edges were polished away. Leo learned to control his power. He learned to whisper with the piano and to make it roar without forcing it. He grew taller. His clothes fit better. The sadness that used to hang over him like a gray cloud began to lift. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was a musician. Then came the night of the big recital. It was held in a grand concert hall downtown, the same kind of place where the man had played years ago. The hall was packed. There were wealthy people in fancy dresses, music critics, and reporters. There were even people from the subway station who had recognized Leo's story in the newspapers. Backstage, the butterflies in Leo's stomach were having a war. He adjusted his bow tie, his hands shaking. "You look just like I did at your age," the man said, standing beside him. He was wearing a tuxedo and he looked proud. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Leo said. "Good," the man said. "It means you care. Just remember what I told you that first day. Don't play the notes. Play the story." The announcer called Leo's name. The applause was loud, a wave of sound washing over the backstage area. Leo walked out onto the stage. The lights were blinding, hiding the faces of the audience, but he could feel them. He could feel their expectation. He sat down at the gleaming concert grand. It was bigger than the one at the house, even more perfect. He placed his feet on the pedals. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and in that moment, he wasn't in a concert hall. He was back in the subway station. He was 10 years old again, sitting on a plastic crate, imagining a better life. He opened his eyes and began to play. It was the same song he had played that day in the subway. But it was different now. It was richer, deeper, more complex. The raw emotion was still there, the pain, the hunger, the hope, but now it was wrapped in skill and beauty. The melody soared, filling the vast hall, piercing the hearts of everyone listening. The audience sat in stunned silence, captured completely. When he hit the final chords and let the silence hang, he didn't just hear applause. He felt a roar. It was a wall of sound, people standing up, cheering, some crying. Leo stood up and bowed. He looked into the wings where the man was standing. The man wasn't clapping. He was just standing there, watching Leo with tears streaming down his face. He gave Leo a small nod. Leo smiled. He had come from the bottom, from the dirt and the noise. He had played on a piece of trash with a dream in his head. Now, he was standing on top of the world, and the music was louder than ever. He had started with nothing, but he had ended up with everything. He had found his voice, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would never be silent again.